Yes, good morning, everybody. And this is Friday morning, January 29th, and it's Senate Committee on Agriculture's meeting. So today this morning to start with, we're just going to chat about yesterday's 2-hour meeting and how you think that went and the ups and downs of it. And we have the law clerk from the council that works with Michael O'Grady, Kelly McGill, with us, and she was attending the meeting. And then we'll move on to Ellen Keeler at 10 o'clock or so. She can come, and we're going to switch over to our food issue and food security and all that. Brian has to leave us, Senator Collmore, at 9:30 for a meeting with Dr. Levine in regards to an issue in his county. And Anthony right now is meeting with Dr. Levine on an issue in regards to COVID in Washington County, and he'll be returning when that meeting is over. So with that, I thought yesterday's meeting went pretty smooth for having such a large crowd. I thought Michael Pishak and DFR did a good job. They drilled down pretty good, I thought, for an outfit that doesn't normally deal with dairy and all that. I thought they drilled down pretty well and presented a lot of good info. So I don't know what you guys got away from it. Brian Collmore.
Yeah, thank you, Bobby. I agree. And I think it was refreshing because they were new eyes on the topic. Just as you point out, Mr. Chair, they don't normally deal with agricultural or certainly with dairy issues. So it was good to see that from a fresh perspective, many of the same issues came up. Unfortunately, because the issue was so big and so large and so weighty, they didn't come up with any, really quick solutions either. But that makes me feel better to say, hey, at least we didn't miss something that was really obvious as a way out of this. As long as the federal milk market order is in place, there's relatively little wiggle room for a state like Vermont, which is landlocked on all sides. And that was a big issue with respect to the difference between us and Maine. There are some things we could probably do, but it isn't as easy as just flipping a switch and saying, okay, well, we fixed that problem, now next. So I thought it was very good. I thought Linda did a great job keeping track of the next person coming on to testify. And I thought it was a great meeting.
Yeah, Chris, do you want to weigh in?
Well, I guess I was wanting to ask everybody else if you heard real proposals that we should work on, because I heard them coming to a lot of dead-end conclusions, which reflects our, there's hundreds of people in Vermont that want to help, but how to do it is another question. And so I did not pick up on, here's one or two things you might try. And I'm curious if I just missed it. I haven't had time to digest the full report closely, but just curious.
Can you guys hear me? My internet's pretty bad. I can hear you, but the video is not working.
Yeah.
I can hear you.
You look better with that little round guy there, Perrin.
I appreciate it. I think, I agree with Senator Pearson that, there might not have been one or two solutions, but there is a common theme I've been hearing, especially when it comes to dairy farmers, and it's, what do we need to do to help provide resources to help them run their farm like a business, how to help them with bookkeeping, and then even managing, kind of helping them with managing some of their risks and, the ups and downs. So, I think we've got to, I don't know what the solution is, but, kind of figure out what we can do around creating a program or investing some more money into, education systems. Maybe it's something we work with the state colleges with. Do they have a program that we can help fund as they're looking for ways to create new revenues that would help out our dairy farmers, as they look to improve their business practices?
Plus, we did earlier, we've heard from the ag agency about when we asked the question, how come or why didn't 100% of our farmers sign up for our programs? And it came back that some of them didn't qualify because they didn't have good bookkeeping records. So that kind of verified, the two agencies totally separate from each other, kind of verified the fact that some bookkeeping practices on some farms could be improved. And what we have done as a committee over the years is, first thing we did maybe 10, 12 years ago, was create that farm viability program that Gus runs. And, that came right out of our ag committee, and it's helped, a tremendous number, but we still are getting people that need more training. Chris?
Thanks for the reminder, Mr. Chair, because I wanted to ask you that. This week we heard one of the gentlemen say he wanted to retire. He needed help planning for that. And it made me think of ag viability. We've heard people need technical support around bookkeeping. So all of those are actually handled through the ag viability program, but it was as though folks hadn't even heard of it. So and Ella, and she's transitioning out, but there's a scale issue, I guess, right? If she's helping 36 farms a year, that doesn't, I mean, it makes a dent, but it's not really addressing the challenge. And so I guess my question for you, Bobby, because you know more about it than just about anybody, is it as simple as beefing up funding and amplifying that program, or are there gaps that we're hearing about? Because as I was listening, I was thinking they're not gaps. There's probably just an access challenge.
Well, yeah, because if Gus is, I mean, they do this on a voluntary sort of basis, and what happens is if somebody goes to, a bank or a lending agency, and they say, well, you haven't got a good plan worked out, a business plan worked out, you've got to come back with that. Or you go in to extend your loan and they say, well, you haven't got very good records. Well, these lending institutions suggest to that farmer that they should, contact VHCB and have farm viability come. And so it isn't like we're requiring anybody to go there. And I think they do, or they were doing about 50 farms a year. And, maybe somehow we could switch that system a little bit so that more, and it doesn't cost the farmers hardly anything to have those folks go and work up a business plan and set them up on a good bookkeeping system. So yeah, we can have Gus back in sometime and move forward with that.
That is that part of, there's a lot of advocates and activists will say fully fund VHCB, and every year we notwithstand the structure, but VHCB is funded by the property transfer tax, correct? Some portion.
Well, part of it, yes.
Some portion of it. The property transfer tax this year is booming because our real estate's taking off. My question is, do you know, is the farm viability piece out of that funding, or is that something in a separate column?
No, it's out of their total allotment. And this particular year, that's the governor's recommended that be fully funded with the transfer tax. Plus, we gave them quite a lot of money through the CARES Act too this past year. And and Gus usually doubles and triples that money through grants and federal money, matching money. Those dollars go a long way in helping. They talked some, and some of the farmers talked some about a management program in managing the supply of milk. I think that was mentioned, or I think even PSHAC maybe mentioned that, about some type of a supply control or supply management plan that could be put, but he thought that either had to be on a regional or national basis. Did you pick up on any of that, Kelly? Did you pick up on whether I thought Jill talked about that, or Michael PSHAC commissioner talked about having a management tool?
Yes, thank you, Senator Starr. Jill Rickard with DFR did speak about supply management, and it's detailed in a section of the report that gives several examples of that type of program.
Yeah, and so that kind of floated to the top. Did you pick up on other suggestions, Kelly, as you listened to the proceedings?
Sure. So Jill Rickard went through the different types of options that DFR considered, and those include risk management, state pricing orders, regional compacts, an increased focus on organic production, and, as has already been discussed this morning, increased support for innovation and farm management. And those are all detailed in separate sections of DFR's report.
Yeah. See, so, there's 3 or 4, 5 different options that was mentioned. And it really, see, in our bill that we passed last year, there's a provision where we deal with what we've done, and then we move it on to a task force to be appointed by the president, the committee on committees rather, and the speaker to dig and drill down deeper in the future. Corey?
The other thing I was thinking, so we can't control the price they get for milk, but I have a feeling we increase the cost, what it costs them to make 100 100 pounds of milk. So is there things we could do to look at what, what are we costing dairy farmers in Vermont? And are there ways that we can reduce those costs on them, on top of buying support? Because, we're not gonna be able to help them out on the top end, but my guess is it'd be interesting to see how much milk we produce plus what we cost and what our impact is on the price of producing milk. And I bet there's a healthy amount.
Well, the input, so you're talking about the input costs.
Yeah.
Well, we did hear a little bit about the input costs yesterday, but they talked about regulations and a few of those things, but most of our farm community is pretty well exempted out of about everything and anything that I've been able to dream up over the years. They don't need to register any of their farm vehicles, their farm trucks. They have to keep lights and those things, keep them safe, but they don't have to go over to a motor vehicle and lay out a bunch of money for their manure trucks or their feed trucks or their dump trucks. The one issue I think we could talk to Anson about and work on is the large farm fee, or I think Walt Gladstone brought up something about fees that he brought up on one issue. I'd have to look back in my notes.
Well, we know state policy makes their electric bill cost X percentage more, with Efficiency Vermont. We know they pay the large farm and medium farm stuff. So they considerable costs that we might be able to.
Yeah, but I also, we'd have to get a cost analysis because they're running, the lights in about every barn in Vermont have been all changed to LED. The milk bulk tanks have been switched over to cooler plates that run a lot cheaper. The motors on their silage unloaders they've been changed. They paid in some, but they've also gotten back some, and maybe we should get a cost analysis on what they paid in versus what they've gotten out, and we could get that, I think. Chris?
Well, I think that has been done. And the problem of thinking about it of terms of what have I paid on my bill versus what have I got on in my business is that that overlooks the reality that the whole system has the demand on our electric, and the whole system is kept down, is not grown since 2000 because of these investments. And that's saved everybody money. So but it has been quantified, and clearly their farms are big users, and so they see a big efficiency bill. But that is looked at by the PUC every few years as they come back. The analysis is there. I'm sure we could uncover it and have folks walk us through it. But it's just really hard to say to an individual who is saying, yeah, I got something, but that was 5 years ago and I keep having to pay this. And it's very unsatisfying and probably hard to believe that the system overall, the benefit to the entire system benefits each individual ratepayer. And that's really a hard argument to make, but it doesn't change the fact that it's true. So I just want to caution that we should be careful of diving in too loudly and deeply on that point, because it sort of perpetuates, I think, an unfair impression that people have about Efficiency Vermont.
Yeah, and Brian?
Thanks, Bobby. I do know that, and I've heard this from farmers directly, that administrative costs in terms of permits and all that, not always, but they can be prohibitive. There are examples where that kind of really held up a farmer from doing certain things. Efficiency Vermont also has an opt-out program. I think if you can find a company that can run its own efficiency program, I think there's an allowance for getting out. Pretty
Yeah,
sure.
I had to do that once with one of my smaller businesses. You have to prove that you're doing super good with all these modifications and you can opt out, but you spend a lot to get to that point.
So I do have to leave in a couple of minutes to go to this Department of Health. I don't know whether Chris and Corey were brought up to speed, but we got an email overnight from the Department of Health that there was a virus outbreak in the Rutland area. And Anthony got one that said the same was true in the Northfield or in the Washington County area, which I think is Norwich University. I think it's at Northfield. I think I heard over 70 cases. So they've asked the delegations from each of those areas to meet with Dr. Levine to get more information. So just in case you guys didn't know, I got to step away, but Anthony should be coming back from his meeting with them.
Yeah. So are there other issues on the input side that we could, recommend or talk about that any of you picked up on yesterday or in the past, Chris?
It's not directly to inputs, but we heard, I think it was last year, maybe it was a year and a half ago, hello, Anthony, of the folks, it was the land trust, I think, how they were, got some grants, and this had to do with land transition. So it's not inputs, but it is a big issue for dairy in particular. People are ready to retire, and the risk of consolidating further, where we still have new farmers who are saying, "I wish I could get land." It's a real catch-22. So, to me, it's not about necessarily a boost for current farmers. It's about helping people transition out and getting new businesses in onto the land. And so at some point, I'd love us to hear an update there. And it's it's the inputs for the brand new businesses, but it admittedly wouldn't help somebody that's in the middle of trying to improve their business.
Yeah, I don't know if it was yesterday or when the day we had Walt Gladstone and all those folks on, that a young farmer was saying that they had really severe problems buying just, I think it was only like 4 acres or 5 acres of ground to grow, their veggies on. But if you think about that whole deal there, that would certainly make a difference for the guy that, like you said, wants to retire, and then get the new person on that land. I think it was Cahart yesterday was talking about his 2 neighbor farms that sold out. And he said that he didn't ever expect to see another cow on either of those 2 farms. He said something to that degree. And, if there was some way there where you could convert that, even, I don't know if land trust divides property up that, so that instead of having one person on 200 acres, you could divide that so there'd be 4 50-acre parcels or something. We'd have to, because what we're trying to do is keep blocks of land together. And so I don't know how that would go. Doing a subdivision of larger parcels into smaller, because that isn't good for the ag community when you do that, because of transporting and picking up products. And I mean, there's all kind of tractors on the road and equipment. There's all kinds of issues that crop up when you subdivide land. But I think somehow we got to figure out a system to allow these new people in. That's for sure. Yeah. Morning, Anthony.
How y'all doing?
Well, we've got it pretty well figured out. how
Oh,
we're
good,
Solve this problem.
good. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I wish the heck we did have a way.
I know. Well, it's only been 40 years. We're still working on it.
So did you get any takeaways from that meeting yesterday that would be helpful, or that where we could ask this task force to move toward?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, it's just remains really complicated. And, they talk about the possibility of doing some state price setting. But then I think I don't know how you do that without getting through Washington, without getting some kind of approval from the Congress, or not getting blocked by the Congress. So I'm really not sure I got any particular new takeaways, to be perfectly honest, unfortunately.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys had picked up at all on, but I got to thinking and wondering if you can only send 85% of your product to the whoever's buying it, but yet they'll still accept the other 15% or part of that 15%. But and they are told, well, we'll still take that 10, 15%, but we're only going to pay you what we get paid for it. And I'm wondering if there's a smooth way of checking out, well, where did that other percentage go? Did it go to the powder plant? Did it go to some fluid plant? Did it go to a cheese plant, or did it go in somebody's manure pit? And so I don't know if there's a way of if that all goes through the federal order, that extra or not. I don't know if you guys thought anything. I sort of picked that drift up yesterday, and then the day we talked with that other group of watershed people that were farmers. No comment?
No. I mean, didn't they also talk about, like in Maine, they can do it because the milk is sort of staying in Maine, or you can set the price for milk that stays in your state, something along those lines? Am I making that up, or did we hear that?
No, you heard it right. Was they got Canada on the north and the ocean on the east, and
Right.
and they they've only got a couple hundred farms, so
Right.
they can control it pretty close. But I know the guy from Agrimart yesterday, he mentioned that they do get a milk premium. But he didn't tell us, of course, how much, and it really isn't any of our business to know. But I'm wondering, I didn't hear any DFA farmers say they were getting any premiums on any of their milk. So I don't know what goes on there. I know we did hear about milk districts. We're in the Northeast Council or the Northeast District, and if we raised our price too high, then the Midwest District could bring milk in. But that, and that's only, they have to be able to prove that we can't supply that product in our own district, I believe. And I don't think we're really getting the premiums from our value-added products getting back to the farmers,
That's true.
in all cases. What, did you have anything, Anthony?
No, I think that's true. We talk about how valuable and important our value-added products are, but farmers don't seem to be making any more money because of it. It's just the processors and the sellers get to make more money off of cheese and ice cream and whatnot, but doesn't necessarily get back to farmers. It also makes me think again about, dreaming the impossible dream kind of thing, about how people can get premiums if they market their milk as local or from Vermont, that kind of thing. And I don't know, we've talked about that, and it seems so hard to do, but if we could market milk as Vermont milk and run it through a processing plant that is controlled by Vermont in some way, I think then you could pay higher premiums for that milk and pass it on to the consumers, because consumers would be willing to pay more for a Vermont product. They often think they are paying more for a Vermont product, even though it's not a Vermont product, or even though they're paying more, doesn't mean that the farmers are getting more. I think people think when they buy Cabot cheese or something that farmers are getting a benefit from that. I think it's not necessarily true, but consumers are willing to put out more for those products because they presume that it's benefiting Vermont farmers.
And and there is a reason why people buy Cabot cheese, and it isn't just because the name, they know it comes, or pretty sure it comes from Vermont. If you go, I don't travel a great deal, but I've traveled a little, and you buy cheese down south or out west, it doesn't taste like our cheese. It isn't the same, and I'm a strong believer that it's because the way our grasses grow and the way our cows are fed and the care that they get. And I've had testimony over the years past that you get 11 pounds of cheese out of 100 pounds of milk here in Vermont. And elsewhere, they do good if they get 10 pounds of cheese out of 100 pounds of milk. And our cheeses, so if they taste better and different, then I think it's a well, what about the yogurt that comes out of here? And you know, Ben and Jerry's may be here because of both Ben and Jerry starting the company, but you know, those sales wouldn't keep up to, you know, $4 or $5 a pint on ice cream if there wasn't something in that ice cream that tasted better. And
I'd be lucky to find a pint for $5.
pardon?
I think you'd be lucky to find a pint for $5.
Oh, is it
I think
more
it's
than
more than that now.
yeah.
They don't-
So
They don't sell their seconds anymore.
No. Although in St. Albans, I'll put a plug in for them because they're hiring. If you work for them, they send you home with 3 pints a shift.
well, that's pretty good. Well, why don't you bring some down for us? Get a night job there.
I might have to.
Yeah, it you know, it's too bad we don't tap into that value added stuff somehow to generate you know, it wouldn't take a lot to generate quite a bit of money.
Yeah,
Maybe-
years and years ago, and many years ago, before Cabot was taken over by Agrimark, Ben and Jerry considered buying Cabot and bringing it under their wing as a part of their company, but they obviously chose not to do that. But that would be the ideal situation, would be to have a Ben and Jerry sort of, not have them build a milk bottling plant, you know, and take over the milk market instead of just using their cream.
The lady though that was on a couple of days ago from up above St. Albans in your district, Corey. Boy, I couldn't believe that it costs $1 a jug to buy them damn jugs and a nickel a cap for the caps, and I don't know how much the labels were, but you know, you lose.
And I was gonna say she actually got the final calculation to me for Senator Polina too. I'll bring up now. They've got $200,000 total invested into that operation. So you got to sell a lot of gallons of milk at making $3 after your other costs to make up that 200,000.
Well,
Yeah.
and I was struck. She said people don't come for milk, right? They come for some beef, and then they get some milk or some maple syrup. You know, that's also, I think, very important for us to notice that it's not a driver of behavior, but it's an ancillary. You know, so it's not viable for everybody that doesn't have that diversified option.
Yep.
Yeah, that was amazing that they come to buy other products, and but boy, on a $5, how does Agrimark you know, sell milk for $3.89, and here the lady was trying to get $5 and basically hardly breaking even. You know,
I'm guessing they buy jugs for 10 cents a jug, not $1 a jug, and their labels are probably multiple per penny.
yeah. Well, Kelly, have you got any words of wisdom to tell
Yeah,
us?
Kelly, draft a bill. Draft us a bill to fix this, okay?
I'm not sure that I'm able to at this point, but I'll help how I can.
No, it's you know, it's hard to figure out you know, the ins and outs of all of this. I think it's going to take you know, bits and pieces, and then you put it all together, and it ends up to, you know, amount to some savings and a little bit of extra income, and And we had one witness that said they could live on what, $17.50 milk. But we didn't have too many jump on that bandwagon real quick, after it was said. Pardon?
I think while we continue to come up with strategies and look for solutions to help dairy, we also owe it to the rural communities in our ag economy to make sure we're removing barriers for other farmers. I mean, we've seen meat producers, really exploding. We're seeing a drive for local foods. Our folks who remember that woman down in Addison County who put up a farm stand. She could no longer get a truck. She put up a farm stand and was selling out. We're coming back to the old, get vegetables at the side of the road and make money. And I just want us, obviously, dairy is incredibly important, but in 10, 15, 20 years, I think the state will be better off if we're slightly more imbalanced, where all eyes are not on dairy, and we need to, I think, broaden what it means to have successful farms in Vermont, while we continue to figure out strategies for dairy. So just put that out there, because we could spend all session hoping we come up with something meaningful for dairy, and in a way we risk perpetuating what I think is clear to a lot of people, that we're perhaps top heavy in the ag sector with dairy. I kind of wish that wasn't the case, but it doesn't change the reality that I think the future is in a broader, more diversified sector, to keep our economy humming in the rural parts of the state, for sure, especially.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's, there's no reason to believe that the loss of dairy farms is not going to continue. It's just the reality. When you get the best minds together to try to figure out what to do about it. I don't mean our minds. I mean the broader group that we talk to. Nobody has a workable solution, I guess I'd call it. I mean, it doesn't seem to be one out there. It's like we're drifting along, like letting the industry call the shots, and the industry wants bigger and bigger. It makes it easier for them. So I do think the wake-up call would be to make sure that we do everything we can to make sure that agriculture is strong in the state, realizing that dairy our ability to strengthen dairy is quite limited, if not possible. So we should be better off making sure that we balance it out with a more diversified farm economy, which is difficult in itself, but it just, I don't know what else there is to do.
But you don't want to forget, in this process, that if you have 4 acres of strawberries, raspberries, you can make quite a lot of money, and you can't expect to keep our open spaces and our fields green and our brush away from our fields if you don't have some major agricultural production going on quite a lot of this land. I think there's room for both, and right now we're trying to. I think our committee is trying to advance these small types of agricultural production. whether it's berries or sheep or goats or whatever, but at the same time maintaining the larger part of our dairy or our land base to keep that active and actively farmed and looking good to, while all this transaction is happening. Corey?
Yeah, there's a saying that's always stuck with me was that the dairy cows paid the taxes long before the maple trees did. And also that, when you look at how important dairy is, not just on the farm, my whole manufacturing infrastructure in Franklin County and ultimately northwestern Vermont is dairy based. It's Ben and Jerry's, it's Barry Callebaut chocolate, it's cheese at up in Enosburg. So we still need to figure out ways to make milk come in those doors. That being said, I do think I would be really interested in spending time on what we can do to increase, whether it hits a couple pieces, both helping out dairy farmers diversify, but also food security. We really have to figure out this meat processing shortage and seeing what we can do to invest or adjust regulations to make it a little easier. I was talking to a processor or a farmer yesterday who said, I can take a cow down to the local butcher to have him cut it for me and to cut it for like a half, but he can't cut it for USD, for me to sell. So he goes, there's some capacity in the system, but because of regulation, like I just can't have him do it for those purposes. So, anything we can do, I think, and I don't know how much of it's federal versus state, but anything we can do, I think we need to try to address this year, even if it's a temporary adjustment while we kind of work through this shortage.
Yeah, I agree. I think the meat stuff, I remember back in, I don't know, Chris, you might remember, I think it was back in 2000 or earlier, when we were talking about the fact that Vermont had lost half its meat processing plants. So, while Howard Dean was governor, I think is what we were talking about. But I go back to what Bobby said as well. I mean, we need I'm not implying that we don't need the dairy economy. I think that there'll always meaning foreseeable future, we will have the milk to go into those plants to do the Ben and Jerry's and the cheese plants and all that, because there'll always be a direct way to meet the needs of those plants. I think that will not go away. But I also think that what we need is some kind of larger farms that are livestock based, which is different than milking cows. I'm not against milking cows, but I think that what we need to do is to plan for other kinds of livestock based agriculture to keep the land base open. Because you're right, planting berries is not going to keep the land base open, but meat, livestock farming, whether it's sheep or meat, beef, whatever it might be, can go a long way to sort of maintaining that open land base, which then other farmers need in terms of manure and the land, access to the land and whatnot. But I really agree with the meat processing stuff. Just seems incredible that we can't find a way to make that work, knowing that there's the ability to produce good quality meat and there's a market for it, and can't get anything, not being able to get a process just seems like sinful to be able to find ourselves in that situation. It just seems unfathomable that we can't fix that somehow.
And there is, Corey, a lot of federal limits, I guess, right? We last year or 2 years ago, we expanded on-farm butchering that you're referencing, where we permitted folks to quarter animals, I think, to make it a little bit easier than just having to say, do you want half a cow or zero? So we've been tiptoeing, but even there, even that we were kind of having to be very cautious about federal overlap. But what I don't understand is the demand is there. How come there's no entrepreneur stepping up? I mean, maybe it's just a huge upfront cost, but maybe that's where we could push some of this one-time money. I mean, working lands. I hope we will talk to them about that, because we really ought to have a vision for what is the capacity, and then, you know, what is the capacity for processing meat, and then, you know, where's the biggest hole right now regionally. You know, folks are talking about bringing animals to Pennsylvania to get slaughtered. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy to truck the animals to Pennsylvania and then truck the meat back. We may as well do that here and ship it finished to wherever it's going. I know, you know, last fall when we were dishing out the COVID money, we talked to the agency in some regards about pushing some of that money toward the slaughter facilities.
Yeah.
Well, it all happened too late. They had to do it. They did do an inventory of what slaughterhouses felt that they could use if they needed to expand to do more, if they wanted to expand. So they have all that information in regards to expanding the slaughter and packing facilities. So we could have Abby, I believe, either she did that or she had one of her people do that, and they have a report that they could certainly share with us to see if we do get more COVID money and money that can help. That would certainly help a lot on the beef industry and help people with a few animals to be able to get in.
Yeah, I think we should really make a pitch for seeing if COVID funds could be used to do this, to invest in some kind of manufacturing plant in terms of helping the overall rural economy come back from COVID. I mean, I even remember when, you know, we live in Middlesex and we used to like raise lamb and raise sheep. And years ago, we had to stop doing it because we used to bring our sheep to Hyde Park, and they shut down. And then we had to take it to St. Johnsbury. And for even, you know, for the dozen lambs that we were going to do in a year, like driving them to St. Johnsbury to be slaughtered just didn't make sense. So we stopped doing it. It's just a really small scale kind of thing, but it just shows you how, like, you know, it was ridiculous to go to the other side of St. Johnsbury to get them slaughtered from the Montpelier area. Didn't make any sense. So I would really hope that we would find a way to challenge the state to come up with some COVID funds to help solve this problem. And the other thing, Chris, keep in mind, it's not a very attractive industry. You know, I mean, there's a lot of people who don't want to be slaughtering animals. I mean, that's a reality. I mean, because one of the things we found over the years was it was hard to find a workforce that wanted to do this kind of work. I mean, it's obviously, maybe it's coming back as an attractive thing to do, but not a lot of people want to spend their day slaughtering animals, quite honestly. It's just a reality.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, we have the workforce, you know, across the board is challenging, but yeah, that's fair. You know, it strikes me as a working lands question, but it's probably the money is a big piece of scale. It is out of scale with typically what they do, but it'd be worth exploring with them.
Yeah, no, we've got some work ahead of us with this whole, you know, this whole issue. And of course our focus is pretty much on food security and how to bring that along. I don't expect us to spend a lot of time on this, but I think you know, for all the work that DRF put into this and that we've put into it, I think we've got to try to do something positive and to hand off to the task force. I think we have a limit on I think we have to do something like within 45 days or so. So, you know, we can't spend a lot of time at this, but we've got to be able to move. I want to be able to move forward with it, and so that's where we are with that. So what'd you find out, Brian?
Well, I don't know whether, because we're on YouTube, I don't want to put any information out there that, well, anyway, there's 5 people that work in one of the departments at the hospital that have tested positive. So now they're trying to go back and trace who they got, you know, what patients they interacted with, if they got discharged from the hospital, where those people went. So it's kind of like that domino effect. But to me, it wasn't as serious as I thought. When I hear a virus outbreak, I think of, you know, 100 people. It was 5 people, and I think we were all a little bit less concerned by the end of the meeting. I know did Senator Polina get a chance to weigh in on his deal?
No, well, it's getting closer to 100 where I was.
Yeah, that's what I thought I'd heard
Part
too.
of it is that they're finding that for these younger people used to get, when they got, I should say used to, as if it's years ago, but younger people were getting a couple of symptoms, like 1 or 2 symptoms, and then getting better. Now they're getting a dozen symptoms at the same time. So it's getting harder for them to come out of it. They're getting a broader array of symptoms when they get the virus. So they're sicker this time around than they were last time when they had the outbreak.
Well,
And they had them quarantined in your room with your roommate. So it's like kind of duh, you know. I mean, quarantine should imply that you're on your own, not with a roommate.
Up here, the universities have a quarantine dorm or a whole. Did they not? Maybe they just don't have the building space at Norwich.
They have some, but not enough. They have quarantine housing, but it's not enough.
you would think that at the hospital, our hospital, most of them were all vaccinated, golly, week and a half, 2 weeks ago.
And that was brought up, Bobby. Of course, you got to get 2 shots, right? So the great majority of the workers did get the first one. Some have not had the second one yet. The other piece of that is after you get the second one, it's still a week or 2 before you're completely immunized.
Yeah.
And it all it means is, and it's not 100% effective, it's like 95, okay? But then the other part of it is you are immunized for yourself, but that doesn't mean that you don't still have it and can give it to somebody else. So there's a whole bunch of different things going on, and I don't know what the heck to do. I think I'm just gonna stay in my room forever.
Yeah,
We'll be with you. Don't worry.
I know. I'm getting damn sick of being cooped up.
Yeah.
How's Mrs. Starr feel about it?
She said that in all the years, I probably spent more time at home since COVID come than I did in all the previous years. Yeah. Well, why don't we take a little break, and we have Ellen coming in at 10, I think 10:15. Is that right, Linda?
Yes.
Well, yeah. So why don't we'll stay right on. Just you can close your camera and zoom off. Kelly, thanks a lot for being with us. If you want to stay for Ellen Keeler, you're more than welcome to. We've got a hodgepodge of things to visit with her about. So I don't know your time schedule, but if you want to stay, you're welcome. And if you have other things to do, that you plan, feel free to do either.
Great. Thank you, Senator Starr.
Yeah,
I'll leave those sit over there.
Hi, Ellen.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
Good. Good. A little chilly up north. I don't know about down the banana belt.
Well, I'm in Starksboro at 1,200 feet, so we've got negative 19 wind chill.
That's good. Yeah. Are we going to talk a little about sustainable foods and all that, or?
Yeah, I'm gonna talk with you about the notion of food security in terms of some regional food supply, and I have a suggestion for some legislative language that you might be interested in. And just so you know, then we have a good 3 hours planned for February 11th to go over the strategic plan.
Does Linda have that date and all that?
Yep.
Yeah, good.
Yeah. And then you're going to be speaking at the press conference on February 8th. So I'm going to give you some talking points if you would like to have them.
For that?
February 8th, yeah, for the press conference where we formally release the plan.
Yeah.
At 11 o'clock. We'll be sending you out early next week. I'm going to be sending you what you need for February 8th. And next Wednesday, I'll be putting the plan in the mail to you. So you will have it in your physical hands before the press conference.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah. Well, we spent quite a lot of time talking with different groups and hearing from different groups. And Mr. Poisner from UVM, from the Gun Institute, he wants to help out any way he can, and thought that your plan goes a long ways in helping to to alleviate some of these problems. So
Yes,
the
that's our hope.
yeah. Well, Linda, are we back live?
We are.
Yeah.
And
Well,
Ellen, I just made Ellen co-host so she can show her documents.
Yeah,
Great,
very
thank you.
good. And Corey will be along with us momentarily. There he is. He is back. Ellen, we've got about an hour or so that we can spend with you, and we don't want to waste any of your time or ours. So why don't you? I think. Do you know all the members? Do you know Corey? Parent?
We haven't had
Senator
really the
Parent.
privilege of meeting and having real discussion. We sort of know each other in the hallway kind of thing, right?
Yep, absolutely. Looking forward to working with you.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
too.
So why don't you tell us what we should know?
All right. Well, thank you very much. For the record, Ellen Kaler, Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund. So I appreciate the opportunity to chat this morning because I understand that you all are contemplating how to help get Vermont on an accelerated path to increasing the availability of Vermont and regional food from a food security angle. So getting more of Vermont products into places where people normally shop. I know Senator Pearson, this is a great interest to you, thinking about how do we get more Vermont products just in the grocery stores? How do we get more Vermont meat on the shelves, which of course requires more infrastructure. So what I'm hoping to do today is to share a little bit about some work that I have been doing for many years now with my counterparts in the other 5 New England states, and where we're talking about how to develop more of a regional food system that would provide greater amount of products from the region for the region, and would address some of the challenges that we saw during COVID with the supply chains breaking, where we saw the meat processing plants in the Midwest go down for a while because of COVID. And as we're thinking about the potential shocks to our food system and our food supply chain because of climate change type events, natural disasters, future pandemics, how can we build in some greater resiliency and ability to meet our needs closer in? So what I'd like to do is to share with you a little bit about some work that we've got going. And then there's a specific ask that I have of you all to consider if you're putting together a food security type bill, which speaks to some planning for emergencies that I think would be, we're trying to get all 6 states, their legislatures, to pass similar language that would instruct their emergency management operations teams to put into the emergency management plan efforts to strengthen and increase the availability of locally or regionally sourced food as a means of increasing access, but also decreasing the vulnerability of our supply chains. Does that sound okay? That's what you signed up for?
That sounds good. Is that can we just do that with legislation in each state, or do we have to make that into a compact of some type?
No, I think we can do it in each state because each state has a emergency management plan. And in this case, in Vermont, we have the emergency management plan. There's an Agency of Ag annex. And on your webpage, I provided Linda put up for you the latest version of that. And so after I go through these slides, we can focus and spend some more time on that and how I think the passing very simple legislation, agencies on board with, we can get this sort of codified and get the process rolling in this way.
Yeah, good.
Okay. All right, so let me just share then a few slides because I think you'll be interested, I hope you'll be interested in some of what we might be able to start moving towards both as a state and as a region. And we're calling this project New England Feeding New England, Cultivating a Reliable Food Supply. And my counterparts and I have secured some funding for the next 2 years to be able to do the planning stages of this work, but we're really seeing this as a 15-year effort. So I'm not sure if you all saw this, but this really jarred me when I first saw this. It came out referenced in the New York Times last summer. And it's a study that was done out of the University of Illinois that looked at the actual flow of food using the U.S. Agency of Transportation's, what they call the Commodity Flow Survey data. And what this does is the Agency of Transportation wants to know how are products being moved across roads, bridges, rail, and air from a transportation planning perspective. So what's really interesting about this is this really shows where is product coming into the country. In the case of, you take a look at California, the concentration there, the vast majority of food coming into this country comes through the port of Los Angeles. So you might say, wow, that's really efficient. Wow, we got all this food moving through there. Well, if something happens to the port of Los Angeles, we're screwed.
We're done.
Right? So the same thing, concentration in the Midwest. So you think about over the summer, over April and May, when those meat processing plants went down, you can see where there's this concentration of activity of food flowing back and forth in and out of the Midwest. Then you take a look at the Northeast, and what do you see? You see a concentration along I-95 corridor. Well, if you think about what are some of our biggest challenges in this region from a climate perspective, it's hurricanes coming up the East Coast. It is other kinds of natural disasters that might happen or infringe upon that Northeast corridor there, which could create a sense of vulnerability potentially that we think is important to address.
Yep.
So if you think this was also from this past fall, some analysis done to take a look at what's expected from a climate change perspective. So the green areas here along the Northeast, it's, we're at greater risk for hurricanes and high water events, which could impact roads, for instance, roads and bridges or rail lines, as we've seen in the past. In the Midwest, they're going to be impacted by extreme heat, but as we saw a couple years ago, they also had extreme flooding events that happened. And then, of course, the wildfires in California put pressure on the Central Valley and water supplies out in the West, where a lot of our food comes from. So given these potentials, there's some real need, I think, for some future-oriented planning to try to reduce the risks that we have here in the Northeast because of the fact that we have this infrastructure, the transportation flows are the way they are. So, and the other reason for doing this, quite frankly, gets to what has been happening, and you all know this, over the last 50 years, there's been a massive consolidation across the food system in processing and production, in retail and distribution, where fewer and fewer large companies control the vast majority of the infrastructure of the actual businesses in the system. And while, again, from an efficiency standpoint, you could be like, well, bigger is better, it's more efficient and all that. It also creates greater vulnerabilities, right? We don't have then competition. We're at risk. So for all those reasons, we think that it's time to think about this. Now, I'm going to shift into a couple of slides that get at this question that I think Senator Pearson and others think about a lot, which is estimating food production. So we took a look at the latest ag census and the NAS data. And if you take a look across New England, we produce 7.5 billion pounds of food across the 6 states of New England, that first column there. And you can see here on this slide what the breakdown is of different product types, okay? Now take a look over at the far right there under the Vermont column. So in Vermont, we produce 2.9 billion pounds, but 2.7 billion pounds of that is in dairy. So in essence, what you can see here is we're providing, and you all know this, we're providing the bulk of the dairy products for the whole of New England, and we're also selling beyond New England, but we produce a good chunk of what New England consumes from dairy. You take a look at Maine, their largest crops are down in vegetables, potatoes, melons. It's actually potatoes. So from the standpoint of like, what do Vermonters, what do New Englanders actually need to eat, want to eat, like to put food on the table, the basics. We are out of balance here in terms of how much we're producing of what products and for whom. So to me, this provides a really good sense of like, wow, what could Vermont be doing more of? We could be doing more of hogs and pigs. We could be doing more in vegetables. We only have 21 million pounds of vegetables, whereas Maine has 1.5 billion pounds. Now, potatoes are heavier than lettuce, of course, but the point being, there's a lot more that we could be doing if we're thinking from the standpoint of feeding Vermonters and feeding New England.
So
We're lagging in seafood, I noticed.
We are? Yes.
Yeah, we got to work on that.
Well, you know, rising sea levels, you know, you never know how far up the ocean might come to our border.
But if you go to like eggs on that chart you just had, poultry and eggs, you know, it looks like there's a lot of room for expansion there.
We also do well in maple syrup.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Yeah, exactly. So again, the point here is, you know, in classic capitalism, you know, there's like people, different states and different regions have areas where they can excel and they trade their surplus and all of that. I think go ahead, Senator Pearson.
So talk to me about the per capita availability. What does that mean?
So if you think about the number of people in New England, there are about 15 million people across the 6 New England states. You divide 15 million into 7.5 billion, and that just gives you a rough sense of, we produce 505 pounds of food per person in New England from what we produce in New England, right? But that's nowhere near what we actually need. And I'm sorry, I don't have that number off the top of my head. But in terms of the number of pounds of food that each person eats in the course of a year is much greater than that. And what we can produce across all of these product categories in New England is 5.5 pounds or 500 pounds.
So I'm sorry, but I mean, we could, I think, spend the whole day on this chart. It's really interesting. So on eggs, 0.88% is what New England. So is that trying to say that New England produces less than 1% of the eggs it consumes?
Correct.
Okay. And so of the eggs that are produced in New England, we're making 12. That's where I don't understand. How can 12 plus 0.78 equal? See what I'm saying?
Well, because those numbers are relative to Vermont.
Okay.
As opposed to across all of New England. So across New England, it's 0.88. But just in Vermont, we're producing 12% for what we consume here in Vermont. What we're producing in Vermont could meet our availability. Sorry, it's the availability. So we are producing 7.7 million pounds of eggs, which represents that per capita in Vermont, Vermonters could consume 12 pounds of eggs. That's what's available if they chose to buy Vermont eggs. That doesn't mean that they are doing that. It just means that it's available. It's what we're producing.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. So any other questions on this? I'm going to keep going on this, but just show it in a couple different formats so that it might be helpful to see magnitudes here.
Go ahead.
So this is another way to think about it. This is in a pie chart format, that same chart. So Maine produces 2.6 billion pounds of food, Vermont 2.9 billion pounds. And then you can see the other states. And then, but then again, where's the concentration? The concentration is in dairy at 4.3 billion pounds, 1.8 billion pounds in vegetables, which is primarily potatoes, and then everything else is 1.3 billion pounds, or just 17%. Right. So again, there's a lot of room for diversification, right? Is what it's saying. If the intention is to be doing more of feeding ourselves, which has not been the intention of our ag policy nationally in the past, right? So another way to look at it is this. This is in some ways even a starker way to look at it, right? Look at along those bottom there. We could do beef. we can do more eggs, we can do more poultry, we can do more lamb, we can do more vegetables. If we had the land and production and farmers and food producers, you know, really expanding what we're actually doing.
Now, one question, Ellen, that I'm sure we will get, are those numbers, those low numbers, can we do it in a competitive way, price-wise, to make a living if we bump those numbers all up to compete against where they're coming from at the present? Or if they're coming from, you know, if the tariffs need to be changed or what?
That's an excellent question. And you can't not look at this without thinking about the consumer demand side and the price point side. You're absolutely right. And right now, today, we know that our cost of production is higher in the Northeast and in New England in particular, and even Vermont in particular to that, because of our winters, our growing season, cost of importing feed, like all of these reasons, right, that we know about, means that the cost of production is higher than in other parts of the country. So then that does bring into question federal policy about what are we subsidizing with our tax dollars? How much, you know, so how do we think about shifting some of the subsidies that have been going to corn, wheat, and soy in the Midwest, and think about diversifying those available tax dollars to be supporting more regional food production for regional consumption that would then put more into, say, what's called the specialty crop areas that the USDA funds, right? If you take a look at I think we get like $150,000 a year or something like that for specialty crop block grant money. Like that should be just completely blown up into millions of dollars if we're really talking about doing more R&D on the kind of products that could be grown here. And that could then increase quantities with the intention then of also continuing to try to keep the price point where people can afford it. But as you know, then you have to think about wages and people's earnings. And I mean, all of that stuff ends up coming into this. So there's no magic bullet here that's gonna fix this. But you're right, thinking about tariff policy, thinking about subsidy policy, thinking about the farm bill, all of that needs to play into this.
Yep.
So to me, this is the biggest aha moment for me recently in looking at this stuff. We produce 7.5 billion pounds of food in New England, and we import 71 billion pounds, right?
Uh-huh.
So our best guess estimate, we don't know this, this is just like literally our best guess, is that across New England, regional food consumption is probably around 10%, right? That's what our guess is. In Vermont, we know it's north of 15% for Vermont consumed food. Across the region, we're thinking maybe about 10%. So what we're planning for in this project is putting out there the potential target of what would it look like, what would it take to get to 35% regional food consumption by 2035. Could we set a target of 15 years from now where we change the size of these circles? So we're not talking about making New England an island. We're just saying, can we shrink the amount of food being imported and grow the circle, the amount that's actually being produced in New England and that stays in New England for regional consumption?
So if we could, New England's total is 71 billion pounds that we use.
We import in, yep. Mm-hmm.
And we're only producing 10% of that, basically.
Yep.
7.5.
Yep.
And if you had the map of the states up there, I bet if you showed the available land mass to grow or produce these crops, you know, we're probably in the best shape, or in pretty good shape to have the extra land or the land available to grow and harvest these crops.
That's my sense too. And the other place is probably Aroostook County in northern Maine in terms of
Yeah.
having good land that's available, large tracts of it. But as we know, there's going to be continued pressure on the availability of farmland, and that's going to get exacerbated by climate-induced migration, right? We want people to come to Vermont because of our demographic issues. So we're doing remote worker support. We're trying to get some new energy, new blood, new people coming in, but we are also, if we don't manage our land use policies properly, at risk of losing prime ag soils that we're going to need to grow food on so that we can have a better chance of feeding more of ourselves. So these things have to get understood together. And that's part of what we're going to be delivering to you on the 11th when the plan gets rolled out is that we've got this level of complexity, laid out so we can help think about this. Senator Pearson?
This is very exciting. Thank you. And thank you for, you're doing a good job of how you're visually capturing it. I think a lot about climate, and I think a lot about resiliency, and for many years have argued that some of our population challenges, the green revolution, we used to call it, I guess what I want to say is, seems to me that the food revolution, actually a regenerative ag, a swing back to regenerative ag, and delicious local food, really, is there any reason to think that could work, that will draw people in? We've heard from Mateo, bringing people in from all across the world, actually, to Hardwick, and the impact on the local economy. Do you have a slide that tells us that this is the ticket, or any data to suggest that, yeah, this is actually potentially how we grow our population, in addition to all these other benefits?
I don't have a slide for you, Senator. I'm sorry, but I do think anecdotally we are seeing that. When you take a look at the Ag Census data, for instance, on the number of new farmers and what their profile is, they tend to be young women, and they don't come from farm families. And a lot of you take a look at the entrepreneurs, a lot of the individuals that are at the head of our craft brewing and distilling industries, they didn't grow up here. They came to Vermont because of our foodiness, and it is an attractor. And I think that's why you're seeing the Agency of Agriculture, or the Agency of Commerce. You take a look at the new improved thinkvermont.com website that's coming along. They're doing even more to accentuate the food scene and the beer scene as an attractor to attracting people to want to move here. So anecdotally, I think it's there. We don't have hard data on it yet, though. So I'm not going to go over all of this here. The slides are up on your webpage, so you can spend some more time with it. But this just gives you a sense of the fluidity of food flowing in and out of Vermont that is produced here. Some of this data is food that originates in Canada, for instance, because it comes through over our border, and it just passes through us. But again, because this data is from the Department of Transportation, and it's about measuring the pounds of food moving across our roads, our bridges, and rail, this gives you an interesting snapshot of the amount of food that is just flowing through our state. But the majority of it is produced here, and then it flows out. Okay. So again, happy to spend more time on it, but let me just go. This view of it, I think, is also is instructive, because what this is showing, the food flows into Vermont by region. So of the food that comes in that we import, where is it actually coming from? And this largest block is what's called self loops. So this is where, for instance, let's say you're a maple sugaring operation and you're getting into 50-gallon barrels. It then might go to, say, Butternut Mountain Farm for further processing and get sent out. So that's where there's a self loop. And again, because this data is about the movement of food products and not necessarily who's consuming it, this just gives you a sense of how many pounds of food are literally moving over our roads and bridges and across rail, that is contained within Vermont. This is the self loop part. And then where the imports and the exports are. So we import 945 million pounds from other New England states. We import 913 million pounds from the Northeast, right? And then the next chart over, then food flows out of Vermont. We're exporting 2.3 billion pounds to the Northeast. And again, primarily dairy, right? Yeah. We're exporting 944 million pounds across the 6 New England states. So this just gives you a sense of like, who are our core trading partners in terms of the movement of food? Again, it does not say who's actually consuming it. There is a correlation there, but it's not giving you sales data. It's giving you pounds of movement. Okay. So here's like this, right? That the 6 Northeast states are the top source and destination for most food categories for each other. The greatest amount of movement of food is within New England, and then it moves to the Northeast, particularly New York. And then less so for the Southwest, Inland West, and New England's smallest, those are the smallest regional trading partners. And so this food flow in New England of 71.1 billion pounds that flows out, there's also this, what I didn't show you was that there's, if you add it all up, there's 66 billion pounds that's flowing into the region. So again, some of this is in the case of like in Maine and Rhode Island and Massachusetts, there's ports where there's products coming from Europe. And so they enter the United States and then they move, don't necessarily get consumed in the United States, right? They move to other parts of the US, but their port of entry is in New England. So that's where these, you can see these bigger swings of total movement of food. But I think the most important point here is that this is another data set that I think confirms what we generally know, which is that our biggest trading partners are in New England and New York. So when we think about market expansion and sales and marketing, and where are we targeting, which markets are we trying to open up for Vermont producers? New England is a big marketplace that we have not fully penetrated, that we have opportunities in. I'm going to leave this for now because you can spend more time with it, but it basically is just another way, some more iteration on what I just showed you. And same with these, again, just other visual ways of being able to see where Vermont, this is food flows into Vermont. So we're bringing in 6 billion pounds of food from elsewhere, which, and then we're exporting 2.9 billion pounds out. So this just gives you a sense of the regions that we send, that food is flowing into Vermont from these regions. And then in particular, where there's a little icon of a farm barn, that shows you the state that within that region, where the majority is coming from, the top originator. So of the things we get from the Midwest, Iowa sends us the most, is all that's saying. So in New England, in terms of food coming into us, it's coming from Massachusetts. Okay, so this is then from the outflows. So if we're sending,
what product is that coming out of Mass?
Let's see.
blueberries or something.
Massachusetts flows into Vermont. We're getting 6 million pounds of live animals. We're getting some cereal grains. We're getting sort of general ag products, would probably be vegetables and sort of a whole range. Then animal feed, meat and poultry, grains and baked products. So
Yeah.
it's, we haven't fully mined this data set. And actually this data is from 2012, and there is new data in 2017 that these researchers just haven't updated this, but their intention is to. So we'll see what it looks like when it gets updated. So it's about 10 years old, this data. But again, the point here is to just get a sense of the magnitude of what's happening, and then to ask the question, well, what could be different? So I've been working for the last 7-8 years of my counterparts, the farm to plate counterparts in the other states, and these are the groups that exist, and they all too have some form of a statewide food system strategic plan that they are working to implement in different ways. Nobody is as advanced as we are here in Vermont in terms of having the staff capacity, the funding support, Working Lands Enterprise Fund, all of those kinds of things tools that we've developed over the years to support this sector is the envy of the rest of the region. Maine actually, interestingly, is actively trying to see if they can get a Working Lands Enterprise Fund stood up in Maine right now, because they see what we've been able to do with it here in Vermont. So here's our goal. So we came up with a project that we all could work on together as a full region and not just state by state by state. And that's to expand and fortify the region's food supply and distribution system to ensure the availability of adequate, affordable, socially and culturally appropriate products under a variety of rapidly changing climate, environmental, and public health conditions. That's what we're ultimately trying to affect. So we have 3 areas that we're going to be working in over the next bunch of years. So one is we really would like to set some production milestones state by state, looking at food availability data, looking at this food flows data, looking at overall US Census production data, and then trying to see what is each state's contribution towards the region getting to 35% regional food consumption by 2035. What would be required? How many acres of land? How many farmers? How many animals? How many acres under vegetable production? And then think about it out along the supply chain. What's the increased amount of processing capacity? New distribution routes, additional distributors that are needed, additional storage capacity and warehouse infrastructure. You start thinking about all of that, what happens as you increase the raw product production. You need to then also be thinking about all the other parts of the supply chain and the kind of investments, both private sector as well as public and philanthropic, that are going to be needed in order for us to be able to achieve this. All 6 states working together, understanding that Maine and Vermont are going to be the biggest providers of food, and Rhode Island and Connecticut and Massachusetts will be the biggest consumers of food. New Hampshire will be somewhere in the, we're not really sure exactly what New Hampshire will do in this mix. They have they have a lot of eaters, obviously, in the lower 2/3, but they also have some production capacity ability in the northern 1/3 of the state. So it's trying to figure out, like, how many acres does Maine need to bring on? How many acres does Vermont need to bring on? Where's the workforce going to come from? All of those questions in that first circle. And then, because of course the reality of climate change, we want to make sure that whatever increases in production, whether that's actual like raw production of products or food manufacturing, for instance, or storage and distribution, that we're doing it in climate friendly ways so that we're not adding to greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture and food production. So we want to understand what that looks like, set some baseline targets, work with extension staff across the region to try to think about how do we get more of these climate friendly practices understood, known, and in practice.
But
And then
one thing,
thirdly,
um, one thing you do have an offset there because by being able to show where all this food is coming from and into New England, there's a tremendous amount of truck transportation, I would presume, that's doing that. And so you've got an offset of some of that, green, positive green things.
yep. Yes, although interestingly, there has been analysis done that, for instance, it's actually less of a carbon footprint to bring in lamb, meat lamb, to eat from New Zealand than it is to truck it around New England. Interestingly, because they're at such a scale that you could send it in full containers, and that is actually a less carbon intensive way to do it. Now we can debate that, but it is an interesting part of the discussion,
Yeah.
and shows how much we still need to understand about all this.
That's unbelievable.
I know. I have a hard
Because
time
they-
believing it too, but
Once it comes in, they still have to distribute it around the New
Yeah.
England.
yeah. So
Yes.
then the third piece, and this is what I want to spend the rest of our time talking about, and is around this food security emergency preparedness plans.
Yep.
So, and I want to just distinguish here that there's a couple of, we're actually thinking about food security from two different perspectives, right? We normally think about food security from the standpoint of hunger alleviation, like physically getting enough food to people so that they're not food insecure. So that's still true, but we're thinking about it a little bit more broadly from the standpoint of food security from a decreasing the vulnerabilities of even having any food on the shelves for anybody across New England because of climate change, because of pandemics, because of unforeseen natural disasters, civil war, whatever you want to come up with as the reason why something might happen, right? So we think that there's an opportunity to utilize an area of our state infrastructure apparatus that hasn't yet been focused on this question of food security, which is our emergency management plans. So here's what I'm sort of putting out there for your consideration, see what you think, is to instruct the Agency of Agriculture to expand what's included in the Vermont Emergency Management Plan, what's called the Agency of Ag Annex. It's a separate document, but it's like an appendix to the state's emergency management plan. And what we'd be asking the agency to do is to create plans for supporting agricultural and processed food production expansion in the state in order to mitigate the impacts of food supply chain disruptions. So that's like the focus of why we would do this. And the plans should include instructions for making food products available to residents, as well as instructions for increasing food production within the state. And to develop these in collaboration with other appropriate agencies and nonprofits. And we think that by starting this exercise of looking at this, it might mean that there's other parts of the emergency management plan that also need to get tweaked a little bit to accommodate this addition of looking at planning for food security. And the second part of the request would be to instruct the agency to work with all of the partners who to collect information about all the emergency feeding operations that have been coordinated and stood up during the COVID-19 pandemic, such as Vermont Everyone Eats, to capture those lessons learned and best practices, and to get it on paper so that it can be used for future emergency events. So that's so the intention here is, and there's a one pager on the web page too, that looks like this on your web page, that just gives you a little bit more background on this annex, because literally like 3 months ago, I had no idea this thing existed. So, all the agencies have this. It's part of the state's emergency management and emergency preparedness apparatus, right? Each agency has certain areas that they have sort of they'll take the lead on or have jurisdiction when there's emergencies. If you take a look at the plan, which is also now on your webpage, their annex, it is focused on, understandably, on things like what happens if we have floods, like, for instance, Tropical Storm Irene, right? So after Tropical Storm Irene, we learned a lot about, could the food that got flooded still be eaten or not? And how do you get food to people who are in areas that are cut off? Or, for instance, let's say there's an avian flu outbreak. What's the checklist for the activities that will happen when there's a sense that there might be an animal disease outbreak happening? So these are basically, this is like the playbook. This is the instructions for how the agency will respond when an emergency arises. And we're suggesting here that let's start thinking about a more robust planning effort, anticipating that there will be more food supply chain disruptions coming because of climate change and because of future pandemics and other things that we might not be able to totally foresee. What it would do is provide an opportunity to have conversation about what needs to get included. And it potentially could also include agency staff doing some exercises, some astral practice events, tabletop exercises, so that if something were to happen, okay, we need to practice what we would do. The Department of Health does this all the time with different scenarios, for instance. And I know that the Agency of Ag has done them in the past as well. So, what's new here is to get everybody thinking about food security. And this is one tool in the toolbox that would help provide additional justification for why we need to be putting more focus on local food production and investing in the infrastructure for food production. It's not just because we all want it in our stores. It's also because we need to, because we're planning for these future shock and vulnerability events. Does that make sense?
Well, it certainly sounds like a direction that that we have talked about going in, serving New England with all different types of foodstuffs, and the dairy, our dairy industry's been hit hard, and we need some alternative products to fill in, on some farmers that have left their land and want to, of course, keep it in ag and keep it looking good and healthy. And so I think all of this blends right into where we are. And, the challenge that our boss has given us is to, to come out of this session with some type of a food security plan. And so, no, I think it blends in well, Ellen.
Great.
Anthony?
Yeah, I think excuse me. I think it's really good info. And my question is, or my hope, I guess, and you did mention this as a possibility, that it would not only give us the ability to develop a plan, but hopefully give us a justification for asking for funding for infrastructure, maybe through COVID funds as well. We're planning for future emergencies. One thing we need to do is invest in infrastructure and make these things happen. So you think that it's possible, and you're thinking that it would give us a justification for asking for funding, pursuing funding?
Yeah, I mean, think about it from the standpoint of, like, as a really easy example, after Irene, right? What did we learn? We learned that our culverts were too narrow, or the diameter too small, right? So we made intentional investments in changing out culverts to be larger diameters.
Yeah.
Right? Because we were anticipating that there would be future high water events that having bigger culverts would help with, right? So that led to decisions about resource allocation. So I think there's a corollary there, is what we're suggesting, is that, just having this plan as part of the emergency plan, it doesn't in and of itself do much, but it's what do we do with having that sense that, this is the kind of planning we need to do. How might that then influence how we then direct additional resources in infrastructure development, in getting the private sector engaged with their piece of all of this, improving the way that distribution happens in the state, making sure that we're able to reach all of the small producers because they have a role to play in all of this. We need it all, basically.
Yeah. Chris?
You and others involved in this work, is there, or is this a next step where we start to think about not just the raw volume, but okay, we're going to continue to import bananas, but we could make a lot more eggs. We could make a lot more broccoli, and we're going to have to both import and make more tomatoes. You know, that kind of analysis, because it strikes me that that helps inform, therefore, the infrastructure direction. So can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So as part of that planning process of getting from, to 35% by 2035, our current thinking is that there would be a state-by-state analysis of what could get produced and how much could get produced in each of the states based on their land base, their general interest in producing more food, who's already on the ground doing stuff, the available funding, those kinds of things. So, but the land base comes first. Obviously, we have to secure the land base. So, and then it's an iterative process, right? Because each state is not in itself an island. If we're talking about the region, we might have a sense of what we can stand up in Vermont over a 15-year period. But then where does Maine come in? Where does Massachusetts come in? We might have to adjust those numbers. But your general question is, yes, the intention would be to get at that both in Vermont, but then as a region. So I'll give you a quick example of how we're thinking then. Once we have sort of the data, sort of like the raw data, like what might be possible, what do people tend to buy? There's a data set that looks at called the Consumer Expenditure Survey, which breaks down by race and class, how much people spend on food, for instance. So getting a little bit more sense of what people want to buy and what they would want to be sourcing from the region, for instance, right? Obviously, it's not going to be bananas, but maybe more tomatoes, maybe more eggs. So once we have that, then another critical piece is being in communication with producer groups to test out, like, is this even possible? Like, do you guys even want to do this? Right? So I'll give you a quick example. As we were preparing for the strategic plan we're going to be giving you in 10 days, we did a bunch of focus groups with producer groups, and we met with the beef producers, and we said, okay, guys, you currently do about 17 million in sales of beef products, hamburger, steaks, the whole 9 yards. What's your sense of where you could get to in 10 years based on what you're seeing in the marketplace for consumer demand, your own interest in terms of like, are you doing this to be in business of raising beef? Or are you doing this as a hobby? Like, just trying to get a sense of their interest. And after some discussion, they were like, we think we could probably almost double, like maybe we get to 28, 29 million in sales in 10 years. That seems doable. And then the next question was, but not if we don't have more meat processing capacity, right? So this is the iterative process. We can talk to the producers, but then we have to keep going along the supply chain to talk about the processing infrastructure, the distribution infrastructure, the storage infrastructure, the warehousing infrastructure. Some of it needs to be focused in Vermont, but some of it may be strategically located in say, Massachusetts. The Food Hub Collaborative Group right now is talking about like having some kind of potential for a terminal market. We're really interested in seeing about this, a terminal market, let's say in Brattleboro, that could literally be the point where all the Vermont food comes to and then goes out to other parts of New England and comes back in.
Well, if we could get rid of the Connecticut River, we could do part of Mass and New Hampshire and Vermont have a tri-owned building, a tri-state owned building.
I mean, there's nothing stopping that from happening, honestly, from an investment standpoint.
No, we must work with, get our own act together, but work with these other New England states. It's critical because that's where the people are.
I don't want to underestimate how this is not going to be easy. Like
Right.
this is so complicated and even complex because you got to have the workforce for it. You got to have, which means you have to have the educational system for it, i.e. like for more Vermont Tech kids coming out of Vermont Tech. You need to have the capital available to invest in the infrastructure. It's not all going to be done by state government funds.
Let's hope not.
Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Ellen, I'm just wondering, have you spoken to the agency about this appendix? And
Yes.
you have?
Yeah.
And-
Before I came to you guys, I wanted to make sure that they were going to be okay with it. So yes.
Good idea.
I talked with Abby and Allison, and they talked with Anson and Diane already has an idea of how they could go through it. So again, I don't think this is, I'm hoping this doesn't have anybody that's going to be upset about this, because like this is just makes eminent sense to me.
Well, anytime you change anything, you always have problems. Maybe with the exception of a light bulb, but then they'll argue over what type and how many watts it should be.
Well, the good news is though, the silver lining of COVID is many of us knew that we were vulnerable before the pandemic, right? And what became really super clear is just how vulnerable we are because of the pandemic. And so I think we actually kind of have this once in a lifetime, once in a generation opportunity to really call into question our food supply chain. And what do we want it to look like 30 years from now or 15 years from now? And really get behind that effort and make it, and see if we can make it happen. Because there's more and more people that have had experience with it. They've had direct experience with it, going to the supermarket and certain things that they expected to be there wasn't there.
Have you presented this to the House Committee?
I did on Tuesday, yes.
Yeah. And are they excited about it or?
Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
I think it'd be fabulous for you and Chair Partridge to confer on how if you're interested, how you'd like to move this forward.
Yeah, well, it depends on how, I mean, we have the time to do it because we planned on doing this and, but both of us are lacking our legislative draft person right now, but Michael may be back this coming week so that, we could, or have you put together a draft plan yet?
No,
No.
that Word document that's on your page is the closest I've got. And that is built off of language that's currently being considered in Massachusetts. We're a little bit farther behind in the other 4 states getting it introduced, but it's making its way through like the steps that it needs to go to in those states. So what would be great is within the next 2 years, if all 6 states had something similar on the books, instructing their departments of ag to do this, then we're starting to build that infrastructure of awareness about that we're all in this together. We're all moving in the same direction to make this happen.
Yeah. Anthony, did you? Yeah. Go
I
ahead.
just wonder, is this something we have to legislate?
It's a good question. I mean, technically speaking, if we could probably just have a conversation with the agency and they would do it. For me, the benefit of having it be something that you're requesting is then more of you guys actually know about it and then can ask about it and can study it and it gives a little bit more stamp of approval, so to speak, and gravitas to the importance of it.
I agree. I mean, I think it should be legislated in order to really move it along, put some power behind it. I mean, it also reminds me of how people are talking about resolutions saying that, for instance, racism is a public health problem, those kinds of things, making that kind of statement. And this would be making it clear that, food security or lack of food security is really a serious public health problem for the state of Vermont in the coming years. And this is one way to fix it, is to make sure that we're planning for the future. So I think legislating it's a good idea. I didn't know if we had to, as opposed to whether or not just asking them to do it. Because sometimes we ask them to do things, they don't necessarily do them.
Yeah.
But I think it has big implications, right? Because if, as I said, securing the land base to be able to have enough acres of prime ag land that is still in production means that we have to be thinking about what happens when that dairy farm down the road unfortunately goes out. You know, like what happens to that land, and how do we think about, we need more housing in the state. Where is that housing located? You know, and making sure that it's not going on prime ag land. It means that as we're thinking about bringing in remote workers who have a lot more money potentially at their disposal, that they're not buying a 250-acre farm with no intention of it ever being worked again, because that land is finite. Once it goes out of production, out of the hands of somebody that wants to work it, it's gone. And that in and of itself is a major vulnerability for us, given our size.
We had that discussion earlier this morning, actually, from our meeting yesterday about farmers leaving the land and what happens. Chris, do you have a question?
Yeah, well, it just strikes me that this is we're all heartbroken when we hear another farm is going out of business. But this is sort of the flip of that is, hey, there's another opportunity that just opened up down the road. And it's so sensitive, you know, it's terrible for that family. And so, you know, I know my comments, I try to be careful, and people think, oh, you can't stand dairy. No, that's, you know, dairy is vital to our community and to our economy. And what you're discussing is sort of this opportunity. So I almost wonder if we need to have, you know, the land trust has developed some programs that can ease some of the urgency. When a farm says, oh my God, we're bankrupt, we gotta sell, we gotta liquidate, it's often very quick, is my understanding. And the neighbor, often the bigger farmer, buys the land or leases the land and eases that problem. But to me, what you're describing sparks the need for some way to say, for some entity to say, okay, we'll help you. We'll get you out of debt right now. We'll buy the farm, or we'll put it in a holding. And then some analysis that says, you know, hogs would make a lot of sense here. There's a slaughter facility, whatever. I mean, and I don't know how to do that. It's really dicey because it's private property and it's deeply emotional for people that have given generations of effort. And so I don't mean to make light of it. I hope people aren't hearing that, but somehow this connection to land ownership, stewardship, and opportunity, we got to think that through, and it's going to take a lot of brains, and it's more than just the agency, I suspect.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. What about economic development people? You've approached them, or they need approaching, or because we are going to need money, to outbuild these slaughter facilities, maybe a packing house eventually. We're kind of all in this together, and so
we have not spoken to them yet, but they are definitely on the list of rounds we need to make. A lot of this is going to be, you're going to see it in 10 days with the new ag strategic plan, because we have a brief, for instance, on food security that calls for a food security plan to get developed. And we have in additional product briefs built on what you saw last year at this time, but additional products that look at things like swine and eggs and poultry meat, and that about the opportunities, but the recommendations focusing on what's the infrastructure needed, or what's the legislative change that's needed to enable that. We have a new brief coming on the metropolitan markets and what the opportunity is within a 250-mile radius of Vermont, for instance. We've got a marketing brief that really gets at what are the challenges that producers have of getting their products and talking about their products in the marketplace, and what do they need to do. So a lot of the parts and pieces will be coming to you in 10 days in the plan itself. And then I think the work ahead is then figuring out, okay, what are the pieces we want to move first? What's the stuff that the legislature needs to move on? What's the stuff the Agency of Ag needs to move on? What's the stuff that Commerce needs to move on? What's the stuff that Extension needs to move on? You know, all of those things. What's Vermont Tech's role in all of this? That's the work of the next, year to 2 years, is really getting that moving to be really implementing.
Yeah.
Including
So-
money.
Well, it's gonna, you don't get anywheres without money. Once you get the idea put together so it makes sense, most of our colleagues once you can present it to them so they can understand it. But we have to understand it first. But, we've never had too many problems going to get money, so I'm not worried about that as long as we've got it figured out in a way that we can explain it, that really does the trick.
Yeah, well, for instance, with all the recommendations from the briefs, we counted up what the folks that wrote the briefs, the subject matter experts, and there's about $33 million worth of needed investment, and some of it's one time and a lot of it is year over year programs that need to be supported if we're really going to build this out. Not saying that all comes from the state, but just like we tried as much as possible to quantify, like if we were to move forward on this, what would it really cost? And the other big piece of this, and we talked a little bit about this with you last January, is the need for more boots on the ground. We came up with, there's 33 positions that are needed just in technical and business assistance to work with producers to be able to have the supports they need for things like marketing and agronomic support and water quality improvements and the whole 9 yards. Like, we just have not invested in the people power we need. That's that support ring of people that then helps the producers to do what they do best, which is produce the food and move the food.
Yeah. Well, any other questions, people? Anthony?
Well, just two things. One, it reminds me again of the need we need a food security czar to sort of administer all this stuff and make sure that it happens. But I also, do we have your slides? The slides that you showed us, do we need emailed to us or something?
They are on your webpage. I had sent them
They
to
are.
Linda. And
Okay,
she
sorry, I didn't look yet.
Yep.
I'll make sure that Linda gets those to all of us, those pages, and so we can look them over.
Yeah, and one of the things that's up on your webpage for today for my talk on the agenda is the annex itself. So you can read through it and you can see
That's what I'd like to do.
what's covered, and then it'll be really clear what's not there.
Right.
And the kind of format that it's in, that will also, I think, give you a good sense of like just the level of detail or not that's needed. So just to know, this is the plan, and it is going to be put in the mail to you next Wednesday. It will be sent to your home so that when we meet with you on the 11th, you can have it in front of you, because it's a big document, but I think it's one of these documents you're going to want to, earmark and put tabs on and keep it, because this is a 10-year plan. So we wrote it with the intention that this is gonna live a long time. So I encourage you to, you won't need to read it all before Thursday, the 11th. It's really just so you have it as we're talking about the highlights of it.
Yeah. Anything else? We have to be on the floor at 11:30. So
Goodness.
anything else from any of the committee? If not, thank you very much, Ellen.
Thank you.
And we'll, we'll be looking forward to working with you and others on hopefully promoting and pushing this along.
Great. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Great questions.
Yeah.
Have a good weekend.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
So thanks, guys, and you got to get dressed. I'm already dressed for the house, but a couple of you have got some work to do.
We'll see you on the floor.
Linda will send you next week's schedule, and if you've got something you want to add or delete from it, feel free to let me know.
Bobby,
So with that,
Bobby, Jim sent us the
I
link.
think we had
Jim,
yeah, to that. Yeah.